Hey, here we go. Ready? Come on now.
Mr. Pond Boss, tell me
There
what
we go.
to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Bob Lusk, the Pond Boss, running just a few minutes late. I really thought that I was going to be 15 or 20 minutes late. Spent the day in the field today hanging out with Mike Otto. Got to do some pretty cool stuff, so I thought I would share those things with you here in just a minute. So, you know what I do here, and you guys know the drill. If you will put hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section, click like, and share this to your timeline, you're eligible for a drawing for a Pond Boss hat. There's one right there, living color, real world Pond Boss hat, and a Pond Boss mug that knows how to, say it with me, keep hot things hot and cold things cold. Now, we don't know how it knows how to do that, but it does. So, thanks for joining me, and let's kind of get this ball rolling. Let me see what we got. There's Kenny Sanderson checking in. Good to see him from up around Kansas. Michael Gray over there in Tennessee. Kim Moore. Hello, Kim Moore. Good to see you. Billy Bates. Yo, Bob. Happy 2021. Happy 2021. If we can just stay away from the news and all that and have a little fun with this kind of stuff. There's Chris Ketchum checking in. I haven't seen Chris in a while. He's over there around Bells, Texas. So I'm really glad y'all have joined me. And I'm going to tell you about my day today. And if you've got questions about your pond, please ask those questions. And I'll do the best I can to share an answer with you. There's Sean Peters checking in. Good to see Sean. So today, my day started off a little early. Got up about 4:15 and met up with Mike Otto. There's Drew Hay checking in from Pennsylvania. Yeah, John Krause, but how do it know? I don't know how it know, but it do know how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold. And it does, because I've tried both, hot and cold, and it works. Actually, I had some ice in this one overnight. Of course, it's been cold here, but I figured it'd be melted the next day, but no, it wasn't. Worked out good. There's Mike Cottrell, Dustin Crawley, Todd Austin. Good to see you guys checking in. The day today started off pretty early. Of course, when you're hanging out with the bulldozer guys, you know, I told Otto I'd meet him at 5:30 at a certain spot, and I thought I'd surprise him and get there before he did at about 5:15, and I'd be dadgum if I didn't pull up to the little church parking lot where we were going to meet, and there he was, ready to go. So we took off. There's fishing like a girl, Cat, Baca, good to see her. Mike McPherson from Indiana. So, anyway, the first stop, but I guess it was about 2 years ago, we met Mike Brammer, who he and his family, his wife, and they got a couple of teenage kids, bought some land over in northeast Texas near the little town of Omaha, Texas. And they wanted to build a lake. So Otto and I met with him and kind of took him through the hoops and worked out a deal where I'd consult with him to help design the interior of the lake for fishing and kind of coach him up on how to do it so he'd know how to build habitat for the different species of fish and things. And we did that. And anyway, we took him through the exercises of hiring a contractor. Now, he wanted Mike, but Mike was like a year behind, you know, and so Mike Otto was a year behind. So Mike Brammer found a local guy that had a full-time job, some heavy equipment, and made a deal with him at a pretty good discount to build the lake after hours and on weekends. Well, guess how that went? 18 months later, he went to the guy and said, you know, you're really not making any headway. It's not going like I want, so I'm going to find somebody else. So he found another contractor that's what he does, is build lakes and ponds. So today, our mission was to go take a look and make sure the dam looked great, see what the habitat looked like, make sure the slopes were all good, and answer his questions. I see Vito checking in from Whitesboro. Chris Shabetta, thank you very much, Chris. Looking forward to it too. Actually, I was on the highway and I did not. My GPS told me we'd be back here about 6:40, so we were able to bypass a little traffic, step on the gas a little bit, which is not an admission of guilt, and get here almost in time within about 2 minutes. So anyway, as we looked, First thing I looked at were slopes. Because he had sent me some aerial photographs, some drone pictures that he had taken. And I couldn't tell the slopes. It looked to me like he had way too much shallow water in the upper end. This is one of the first things I look for. I look at the slopes all the way around the perimeter of the lake. And then I look at how much shallow water is there. Now, we don't mind having a little bit of shallow water, but we don't want a huge amount because it vegetates. You know, if you've got his lake's probably, I got to measure it, but it's probably, he says it's 20 plus acres. I'm telling him it's 15. So I'm going to measure it. And if more than about 2 acres is going to be vegetated, that's probably a little bit too much. Now, what he did was he pulled up an old fence of bodark or Osage orange posts and took those and he built these fish cribs, which I took some pictures of that, and I'll probably put that in Pond Boss magazine at some point. But it looked like he had some pretty good habitat. He utilized a lot of native stuff, such as hardwood trees, and he placed some in brush piles. He placed some perpendicular to the shore. The slopes looked great. He even has a spot to build a boat ramp. His biggest question for Otto was, what about the spillway? Because he and his contractor talked about it. They did not put in an overflow pipe. And for the size of the watershed and an average rainfall, he really needs that water to go through a pipe. But he looked at that, decided he didn't want to spend that extra $5,000 or whatever it was going to be for a 12-inch PVC pipe, X feet long. And so he decided to make a wider emergency spillway, brought a concrete contractor out there. The guy says, well, to do this right, it's going to cost about $70,000. He said, whoa, wait a minute. I'm not sure I want to spend that much money on a concrete spillway. Now, the concrete guy knows concrete, but he doesn't really know spillways. So one of the things Otto pointed out was that you really don't have to have the concrete spillway inside the lake, but you need it from where the water level is, maybe vertically a foot under the surface, and then because all the erosion is going to happen on the downslope side. So he was asking, Mike Brammer was asking Otto, what about Fleximat? Otto's used Fleximat, which is, it looks like a bunch of concrete muffins struck together on a pliable organic mat. And you put them out and you roll them out. You put them down and you roll. Now they're real heavy. They're cumbersome. You gotta have the right equipment to do it, like a trackhoe or a big backhoe. But it was asking, would that work? And Mike convinced him, you bet that would work. That'd be a great idea. Now what happens with Fleximat is there's gaps between these concrete biscuits. That's what I'm going to call them. So the mission is to get them in place and then plant grass in between those biscuits so you can vegetate the whole spillway, but yet it can't erode because the Fleximat's in place. So he asked Otto about what he thought it might cost. And Otto said, you know what? You could probably do that for $25,000 or $30,000. So he's pretty insistent on being able to drive across the spillway and said that's going to be his primary source of water flow out, which in the rainy season, it's going to be flowing. Even if it's not raining, he's got enough water wicking and weeping out of the soils that it's going to go across that spillway. And so he decided to look at that, and it's going to cost about 25 or 30% of what the concrete guy was telling him. What about large riprap, says Dustin Crawley. There's Blair Ulrich, Christopher Aguilard. Yep, I was only 2 minutes late, dude. That's not too bad. Large riprap would probably work. The problem with riprap is it's mobile. So when you finally do get that giant flood, which I tell you what, it doesn't really matter where you are. At some point, you're going to have a drought. You just mark this down. You'll go through a drought. And every drought ends with a flood. And think about that. Every drought ends with a flood. And what the flood does is makes up for the rain that you didn't get during the drought. Where if you're getting normal rains, you know, that might help the grass, but it's not going to help soil moisture that much. It's not going to run water, you know, when you're in a drought. So it takes a flood. And when you do get that flood, you know, when you look at a 100-year flood for any given area, the volume varies based on where it is. A 100-year flood in eastern New Mexico is probably 3 inches in 10 hours, where a 100-year flood over in Omaha, Texas, where we just were early this morning, is probably 9 inches in 10 hours. So those, and with such a large watershed, the size of the watershed dictates how big the spillway needs to be. And he had measured his spillway at 500 acres. And so 10 acres of watershed in that part of the planet supports 1 acre of pond. So if he does have a 20-acre lake, his lake's a little bit undersized for that size of watershed. So the good news is his lake's probably going to stay full. The bad news is his spillway is going to get a workout. Now, on the backside slope of the spillway, it goes and runs down to where there's an eroded draw, where the water was spill and then go follow back down and get into the creek that he had dammed up. So the water's going to seek its course and get back in the creek, but he will have some erosion downstream that he may deal with later and he may not. So there you go. There's Matthew Pierce talking about those mats using on spillable levees. Yep, that's true. That's right. Harrison Davis checking in. Good to see Harrison from Georgia. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything here. We'll scroll back up, scroll back down because I don't want to miss any questions. It's kind of hard because sometimes as these things are going by, I don't get to see all of them. And I'll miss some sometimes. Let's see here. Yep, that's it. Dustin Crawley. Yep, okay, there you go. What about large riprap? Going back to that large riprap, it's when that water really rolls through there, that stuff will roll like a ball. And when it does, all it's got to do is roll out of place just a little bit where the water can forcefully hit that dirt and chew right through the soil and erode it, then the riprap collapses on itself. Now, what riprap's really good for is if you want to minimize wave erosion. So you can put riprap along a dam, sticking up maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet above the water line and then a couple of feet down below the water line. Plus, it makes really good habitat for fish. But riprap in a spillway is not the best idea unless you got a really wide spillway and you can anchor that riprap. Now, what I have seen that works real well is people will come in and put in concrete, and as they're pouring the concrete, they'll put riprap on top of the concrete. And what that can do is slow the water flow down a little bit. So that can be pretty helpful. I see Larry Gressett checking in, the floor man from down there in Tioga, America, in Gunter. We got kids at Gunter, grandkids at Gunter. Doug Brown, off topic. I'm ordering some bass from your part of the country. Mike of Camelot Bell asked me to ask around about shipping companies that can aid us in this process. Texas to Georgia, ordering 20 bass. I don't know how big they are. And as expensive as those things are, might be better just to pay somebody to bring them to you. A live hauler. Now if they're little bitty, you can ship them like tropical fish are shipped. But if they're big, they've got to be pretty much shipped overnight, 1 or 2 bass to a box, probably $50 a box. I don't know. I'm not in the freight business. I would call FedEx or UPS and ask them and tell them how big the fish are going to be and how many you'd be shipping. So, and I would presume for 20 fish, that's got to be pretty big ones. There's Tony Sutton checking in from Oklahoma. Good to see him. Latham Pugh from over there at Longview. Dustin Crawley. So is a stacked concrete structure with a pipe the best way to discharge the water? A stacked concrete structure with a pipe. And usually the pipe is typically in the middle of the dam where water has a direct path beneath the dam straight into the creek that was dammed up. And where the water can go. Now, a lot of times those pipes are at a 45-degree angle with just a short standpipe at the top surrounded in concrete. So a stacked concrete structure, I'm not quite sure what you mean by stacked concrete. If you're stacking bags of concrete around a pipe, really the purpose the concrete is going to serve is to minimize, preferably prevent erosion. So let's see here, Jam 10. All right, we got Jim, 1/2 acre new pond in Georgia. Welcome. Owen Nelson. I have a 3/4 acre surface area pond, 23 feet deep, been aerating for 2 solid years, 24 hours a day. Used pond dye several times a year, have put more pond logic, bacteria, magic stuff in the pond every spring. In early fall, it cost a fortune. A few grass carp, bluegill, etc. and I cannot keep up with this silky moss growing all along the pond. I think the more I do, the faster and thicker it grows. Frustrated in South Nebraska. Dear frustrated, I feel your pain. The thing about what you're talking about there is dealing with algae. Now, your aeration system doesn't need to be running now. I would encourage you to turn it off unless you have a specific reason to run it and you've moved it into shallow water. Now, your aeration system, I'm assuming that you've got a bottom diffused aeration system. I'm assuming that. I don't know if you do, I don't know what you have, but that's what I'm assuming. But when you're dealing with algae, one of the things that you can do is that stuff really rather grows in 46 degree water up to maybe 70, and the different species grow at different temperatures. Hey, there's Josie. Hey, Josie, good to see you. I hope Wayne's doing good. I hope Wayne's being able to hang out with you a little bit today. But the more you do, okay, one thing you probably ought to think about to deal with that filamentous algae is to treat it with a chelated copper algicide. I would look at that. Now, figure out when it starts to grow, because here's what happens. Algae grows, then it dies, and it breaks loose, and then as it starts to decompose, it gets gas in it, it floats up into a mat, and then it keeps growing. So the life cycle of algae is really very short. So if you can interrupt that life cycle and then pay attention when it kicks back in and then hit it again, you can treat it with a chelated copper algicide and keep it at bay. Now here's the problem. The algae is not the problem. The problem is you've got sunlight, you got the right temperature for that species to grow, and it's got food. So it's sucking its nutrients out of the mud and somewhat out of the water column. So when you've got nutrients available, you've got sunlight, and you got the right temperature, it's going to grow. That's the problem. If you can get rid of one of these three things, it isn't going to grow. And what you can't do much about the temperature. You can do a little bit about sunlight penetration by using the pond dyes in the colder months, but you can't do much about the temperature, and sunlight. Sunlight, you can minimize that with pond dyes, but you can't do much about temperature. And if you got nutrients in the bottom, then, and it typically grows in fairly shallow water. So your two choices are to get ahead of it with pond dye, like you've done, and to minimize UV sunlight penetration into the water, because it needs the sunlight to grow, because that's where it gets its energy. And the other choice is to use a chelated copper algicide. Your bacteria works great in the summer. It doesn't work too well in the winter. So that's my answer for that for now. Doug Brown, size 2 to 4 pounds. Doug, for as much as you're going to pay for those fish from Texas to Georgia, if he doesn't know how to package those and ship them, I wouldn't do it. Because if he hasn't done it, I wouldn't do it. Now, what you might do is, if there's a fish hatchery around you somewhere, then I would just go talk to them and see if they would loan you a fish transport tank. Then you could put them in the bed of the pickup, go to Texas, get your fish, and haul them back. Or contract with a fish farm that brings fish to Texas from Georgia, or, you might talk to Greg Grimes or one of those guys. Spend some time on the Pond Boss Forum. Find Greg Grimes in Ball Ground, Aquatic Environmental Services, and Lake Management Services, Aquatic Environmental. Talk to Greg, because oftentimes he has a truck that goes from Georgia to like Lone Oak, Arkansas to pick up fish at one of the big hatcheries. Could be that somebody could take the fish to Lone Oak and then transfer them to him, and he can haul them to Georgia for a fee. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. So I see Mark Dauber. Good to see Mark from Montgomery, Alabama, right around the corner from our good friend Ray Scott. Okay, let's see. Drew Hazy, completely against the overflow pipe. It could still be installed way cheaper. Just an 18-inch, 74-foot long for $6,500. Yeah, I think he's against it because his contractor convinced him to not do it. And the only reason I know of a contractor would say no to that is because they don't want to deal with installation. You know, because when you put a pipe, and plus now the water's got the lake's got 20 feet of water, and he's about 8 feet from full. You know, so now he's got to, if you put it in now, he's got to breach the dam, install the pipe, compact around it, and it's really too late. That pipe should have been installed, you know, when the pond got to that level, where the pipe needed to be, and so he just didn't do it. So, and he was against it as we talked. He just didn't want to consider it, and I do think it's because the contractor didn't want to do it. Even though we discussed that early on in our conversations. Harrison Davis. Speaking of floods, what type of company or service would be good to contact to have a primary spillway cap trash rack removed and repaired or replaced? A dang oak tree branch fell on the cap and smashed it good. Holy cow. Boy, I don't know the answer to that, because you got to be pretty careful. You know, I would call one of the. I mean, you have a pond management company. You know, it depends on how big that oak tree is. If it's a great big oak tree, then it's a problem. You know, and then the way I see it is getting the tree away from the overflow pipe, and then deal with the cap and pull it off and put another cap on it. So I don't have a good answer for that, other than that's going to be some pretty heavy-duty manual labor. Ray Riley, Gig'em, class of 79. Hey, class of 79, buddy, right there with you. Wildlife and Fisheries, good to see you, Ray Riley. John Funk, cannot find winners in the 40s. I don't know if you're wiping it off or rubbing it in. That's when I've got a little granddaughter. When I kiss her on the cheek, she reaches up and goes like that. I said, "Are you wiping it off or rubbing it in?" So I don't know if 40s, I know 40s probably pretty good where you are. Let's see, Larry Neal, hey Pond Boss, our bluegill are fat and sassy due to good old MVP, Madison, Indiana. There you go, that's good stuff. You know, I do want to take a minute. Holy cow, it's already almost 7 o'clock. MVP, what he's talking about there is Purina's Aquamax MVP. One of my favorite things about Purina Mills is they have gone to good lengths, great effort to create fish food for you and me. You know, I feed a lot of fish too. And so, you know, it was really, really fun. I'll just tell you the short version. Back in 1995, we sent them a letter and said, hey, you need to advertise in this magazine, this little magazine called Pond Boss. And so, I mean, just within a few days, we got a phone call, and they said, yeah, we want the inside front cover. And so guess what? There it is right there. They've had the inside front cover since 1995. But they said, even more importantly, we want to visit with you because we see the pond management industry as a burgeoning industry, and we'd like to be able to provide products for the folks that you're serving. And so we had several meetings, and then they created some great fish foods and enhanced some of their other fish foods. Game fish chow, for example, that's a good supplemental food for bluegills and catfish and tilapia. That was birthed in a barbecue joint in Glen Rose, Texas, during a roundtable discussion. You know, but what they've done with Aquamax, and now what they did with MVP, we started talking about this 6 or 7 years ago. It's, can you get, you know, hey, Purina, can you guys make multi-particle sizes of fish food to feed the different size classes of species of fish that eat fish food? And they did. So MVP is like 9 different pellet sizes. The smaller pellets slowly sink through the water. So, because here's the way fish eat is some are aggressive, some are passive, some won't even come up and eat if there's much activity going on. So the feed hogs, I call them feed hogs, they eat first. They're going to just blow up on that fish food. Then if there's any food left, then the fish that are not quite as aggressive will get to eat after that. Then there's those passive fish that tend to sit 2 or 3 feet below the surface that you never see. Well, MVP is designed to feed throughout the water column a good 43% fish meal-based protein fish food, and it makes your fish get big too. So, Larry, I'm glad you said that. Spencer Crees checking in from Iowa. Mark Dauber, pond dyes in colder months. Why then? That's a great question. Here's the reason you want to use pond dye in the colder months. Because what pond dyes do is they block the UV rays of the sun from penetrating through the water column. So what that means is that if you get a few days when the water temperature gets warm enough for algae to grow, if you can keep the sunlight off the bottom during those bluebird days that you get in Montgomery, Alabama in January and February, you're going to minimize the risk of your algae to grow. So you're taking a preventative step. But even more importantly, if it blocks the UV rays from the sun, that means it's also going to disrupt the food chain. So when the water temperature starts to go up, you really want the rays of the sun to penetrate the top 2.5, 3 feet of water so plankton can grow. Because about that time, as the water temperature gets into the 60s, your fish begin to spawn. And baby fish have no body fat. All they are is the yolk of the egg. And after they absorb that yolk, they got to eat. And when you're a fish that's about that big, your mouth is about this big, you got to eat little bitty something. So plankton is what they need, and pond dye minimizes plankton growth. So I like to use it in the colder months, so that way when you do get those few bluebird days when the temperature gets up warm enough for algae to grow, you can prevent it, but then the pond dye dissipates by the time the water temperature is climbing out of the window for algae, and then you're ahead of the algae, and you're going to minimize your plankton bloom. That's exactly why we do that. Good question. Dustin Crawley, a preformed concrete storm drain structure stacked up to water level. Pipe comes out of the bottom of the structure and dumps right out in the flow line of the creek at the base of the dam slope. Yes, I guess you're calling it overflow pipe. Yep, that's what I'm saying. Has to be installed right when you start constructing. That's exactly right. That's it. Dustin Crawley was born in 78 and he feels old. Well, you better feel again because you're not. Jeff Wallen, hi boss. How far from bank should the overflow pipe be cut away from the pond side of the dam for whirlpool damage? Pipe is at a 45-degree angle. You need to put a baffle across it. So you want, it's called a Vortex Eliminator, I think. And depending on the kind of pipe that you use, whether it's PVC or if it's iron or whatever, you can put an anti-vortex device, which is basically it's a slab of metal or PVC or angle iron or something that you put going across the intake side of the pipe. So if your pipe comes out and then turns up, you can put like 2 pieces of like angle iron welded or bolted to your pipe, and then it keeps that vortex from happening. The reason you don't want a whirlpool or you don't want a vortex is it creates the suction. It also creates vibration, which this is going to lead me up to the third stop today. So the second stop that we had was a guy that had recently bought a piece of property. He's a forester, and he clear cut the property, got an 8-acre fishing lake on it, and it's got a 36-inch galvanized pipe culvert that runs through the dam that's the primary spillway. Then the water is discharged into a channel, and it goes through another part of the dam that's away from the lake where the water doesn't enter. So it's kind of like an overflow channel, and it goes to another 36-inch piece of pipe. Well, he noticed that his pipe was beginning to decompose. Well, galvanized pipe in most soils can last 20 to 25 years, then it's going to rot. So he went in there with a machine and he dug up that culvert pipe. The beavers had been stopping it up. Water had been sitting through it and in it, and he wanted to get it out. And when he did, he found out that it was corroded all the way through and crumbling. So his question to us is, how do I replace that, and what's the best way to rebuild this spillway? So we had another talk about a spillway. Well, the last stop that we had was pretty interesting, where they have a 12-inch PVC siphon tube. And I'm going to describe this to you, where on the water side of the pond, this 12-inch PVC pipe is about 5 feet under the water. It comes up along the inside slope of the dam, then about 24 inches beneath the surface of the dam. It was trenched across, and then on the backside of the dam, it goes down. And it goes down at a 45-degree angle, and then it turns at a 45-degree angle, and then it's got a 12-inch standpipe that comes up in a T fitting. with a valve on the back side of that. So in other words, the pipe comes down, turns, then there's a PVC pipe sticking up here, then on the far side there's a valve. Well, up on the hillside, the pipe had separated from the 45-degree elbow. So you got this pipe up there in this elbow, and it's pulled half an inch out. And so the lake was siphoning, and it was spewing water up. So they put a temporary patch, and the question was, how in the world do we put that pipe back inside that coupling? And so we had a little exercise about that. Now, that pipe had been glued. It's not normal to come across a PVC pipe that's been properly glued that separates. Well, this one, he told us that he felt like that there was some vibration going on with that pipe. And so if that's the case, and of course with a siphon, there's probably not a vortex going on. There can't be a vortex really. But when that water's migrating through that pipe, it can still vibrate. So an anti-vortex device, and to answer your question, is really, really a good idea. And how far from the bank should the overflow pipe be cut away from the pond side? You know what? If you get that anti-vortex device on your pipe, I'd say if you've got it at least 5 or 6 feet away from the inside slope of the dam, to where you got about 5 feet between your pipe and where the water line taps into or touches the dam, that's probably enough, depending on how big the lake is. Okay, Billy Bates. Let's see what's going on here, Billy Bates. It's Christmas tree sinking time. How do you feel about using them for structure? How long will a bundle of Christmas trees remain effective sunk in a pond? Look at there. Dave Weber is telling you right there. Well, I tell you what. I have used Christmas trees a lot, and then I've drained a number of ponds and gone back and checked, and here's what happens. When you put those Christmas trees in, if you bundle them and just turn them into a pile, they lose their effectiveness by about the 3rd year. Now, if you'll take them and stand them up, if you can stand them like in a concrete block, or if you can stand them in a 5-gallon bucket, and you cluster them, 4 or 5 into a cluster to make a bigger surface area for fish to be attracted, the needles will be gone within about 2 months. The small twigs of the limbs are going to be gone within about a year. The medium-sized twigs that maybe as big as your pinky, they'll be gone after about 3 years. But by the time you get to year 8, you'll have a trunk and a handful of the main limbs left, and that's all there will be left. So if you're going to do Christmas trees, I would do it probably every year. And then keep enhancing. If you've got a spot that holds fish and they like the Christmas trees, put some more in there every year. And that way you've got an ongoing brush pile or an ongoing timber line that fish are attracted to. Let's see here. Nathan Reisdorf. Howdy, I've shut aeration off for the winter. When I restart the aeration, do I need to do it in small increments, like 1 hour a day for the first week? I would do that. Yes, he could do that. Absolutely. So, let's see here. I'm reading Willie. I have a friend that has a property for sale which has ponds on it. Can I advertise it on your site? Need to talk to, I think you can probably link it, but typically we sell ads. But like on the Facebook page, I don't mind if you link it on the Facebook page. Okay, and I'm not sure which friend you're talking about, because I know you got 2 of them with places for sale. Okay, I'm going to go back to Nathan's. Howdy, I have shut the aeration off for the winter. When you restart it, you know what? I think it would be wise to restart it in increments. Now, it depends on when you do it. If you do it when the water temperature is about 55 degrees, here's going to be the best answer I'll give you. If you will check the temperature of the water, and if it's the same at the surface as it is at the bottom, you don't have to restart it in increments. You can run it 24/7. And that's going to be about 55 degrees. Okay, and so if you're not comfortable doing that, do it in 1 hour increments. Add an hour every day until you get it going 24/7. If you're going to wait till April or May, I don't know where you are for sure, but I don't remember. I remember you've been on there before, but I don't remember where you are. But answer is, if you wait until the water temperature is warm and the fish are spawning, then you absolutely do need to restart it in increments like the manufacturer tells you to do. There's Chuck Brinkman checking in from outside of St. Louis. Danny Mac. Dang it, even had my phone alarm. There you go. Okay, Drew Hay, we need to discuss this. If the owner is against it, he is. I would agree the contractor probably didn't want to. It's a lot of labor. However, do them all the time with never draining and dropping polyethylene anti-seeps. Just did a video on it. Actually, I can see here. This won't let me see what you got. Let me. Come on now. Bear with me. I'm looking. And yes, the okay, yeah, okay. You know, I'm going to be real hesitant to talk to him about it again because we did it. You know, we did it in the very beginning. He's made an educated decision. So we're going to leave it. I'm going to leave it right there. Okay, let's see. Harrison Davis over the weekend stopped by local Home Depot, picked up 9 Christmas trees plus another one from a resident and sank them together in 2 groups of 5 near bluegill bedding areas. Here's increasing the largemouth bass groceries. Nathan, that's right. I remember now. You're in Laredo. Okay. Hey, there's Catfish Birch checking in. Good to see you, buddy. So, you know what, Nathan? I'm going to tell you, you do want to when you're in Laredo, so your water temperature is not going to get that cold. So I would say yes, start it up in 1 hour increments because you're going to be. It's pretty cool down there where you are. I mean, pretty warm down there where you are. Let's see here. Anthony Abate, good to see you, buddy, from Chicago, Illinois. Anthony started watching this show when I first started it 4 years ago. Can you believe that's been 4? I've been doing this 4 years. Chris Ketchum, I found 2 otters in my big pond. I hear they eat their body weight in fish daily. Can I trap them in a live trap and relocate them or just send them a 22 in the mail? I'd show them their Second Amendment rights or trap them. Now, if I'm not going to tell you guys to go wholesale kill otters, but here's what I'm going to tell you. They will pretty much eat their weight. Now, here's how they do it. They don't necessarily eat a whole fish. They may swim around, catch a 6-pound bass, kill it, swim around, let it lay on their bellies, chew the guts out of it, and leave the rest of it on your dock as their calling card. I'm not a big fan of otters. I'm a big fan of otters in the wild where they can go prey on wild stocks of fish. But when guys like us work to create a fun fishing lake, then you really want to protect the fishery. So at that point, I think the otter's got to go because I have really seen otters seriously damage fishing lakes, and I've watched them do it pretty fast. Because once they find that food, they'll go get the whole family and bring them all over there, and they're going to feed on your fish. And what's crazy is this time of year when the water's cool, the fish are more lethargic and they're a lot easier to catch. So the otters go play, have a great time, eat your fish, then they move on down the road, you know, and they will eat you out of house and home. They will eat your 5-year-old fish and leave you with nothing. So that's it. Yep. Drew Hayes says, oh, absolutely. Yeah, for the future. Yeah. I'm a big fan of overflow pipes. You know, if we can keep the pressure off of a spillway by using an overflow pipe, I think that's a lot smarter way to go. Hey guys, a little commercial time. Pond Boss Magazine. This is the January, February issue. Just hit the mailboxes in the last week. First time I've ever used a nighttime photo. This is really a stellar photo that Paul Tuzzolino took up in upstate New York. And we've got some really good stories in here too. So if you haven't seen a copy of it, if you want a copy of it, email me at info@pondboss.com. Send your address. Ask for a sample copy. We'll send one to you. You know, but $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date. And it lasts a year. And you get nuggets out of here every issue. So this is what fuels the economy and due in large part to what helps me be able to do this show, you know, just to cover it. So anyway, $35. Please do that. Let's see. Ray Riley, what are your thoughts on putting fake Christmas trees in a pond? Lights have been removed. I love it. I have no heartburn with that at all. As a matter of fact, what happens is when you've got okay, listen to this. When you put that tree in there that's got plastic and wire, not only are you adding some dense habitat for bait fish, you're adding substrate for microbes. So what you're doing there is you're putting a home in the water column where when plankton dies and sinks, it will collect in it and it will fuel colonies of periphyton, microbial colonies that will grow on the little fibers of that fake Christmas tree. So you're essentially creating food, maybe not so much for fish, but a lot for insects, damselfly larvae, mayfly larvae, and that attracts more fish. So the tiny fish will feed on the periphyton, so will the insects, as well as attracting fish. So I'm a big fan. The thing is, Dustin's going to spend his Friday night date. Attaboy. Tell her I said it was okay. You'll get her a couch in a couple of years. Then if you can just get her to read that Pond Boss to you, you'll be in business. See what David Schneiderman, Easy Docs, says here. David's one of our sponsors. He advertises in Pond Boss, and if you're looking for a floating dock or if you want to talk about docks, he's a go-to guy for that. Also, you know what? I haven't said anything about Texas Hunter products. I love Texas Hunter. Their customer service is outstanding. Their products are top of the line. Now, they're expensive compared to other feeders. $850 for a good feeder, or go to the box store and buy one for $250. Now, let's have a conversation in 3 years and tell me how many times that you had to buy a battery or change out a timer or whatever on the less expensive feeder, and how well that Texas Hunter feeder is working for you. As long as we were at our third stop today. Let me tell you about that third stop real quick. Then I'll go to David's question. Our third stop was over near Quitman, Texas, between Quitman and Winsboro. And they've drained a 7-acre lake, and they're doing the best they can to remove some dirt out of the basin of that lake to make it deeper. But the primary mission is to get the dirt out so he can build a privacy berm around the outside perimeter along a state highway. Well, the contractor that he picked, I've met them, good guys, but they're really not well schooled on how to do that. So what we figured out was that they were backing their big off-road dump trucks all the way down in the bottom of the lake and having to pull them out because they got stuck. Well, the problem is they don't need to put them in the bottom of the lake until they can hit some good dry ground. And they basically had 3 or 4 problems. Problem number 1 was they didn't figure out that they needed to get rid of the water every time it rains. So they set up a little cofferdam and they're pumping it. Whereas if they dug a channel from where the shallow end is all the way down to the pipe, they could keep a continual flow of water coming off of that dirt. The second thing is instead of backing the dump truck all the way down, they leave the dump truck up high. And even if they have to use the track hoe to move the dirt twice, they can dig down, move a foot of dirt, put it in a pile, move the track hoe, load it in the dump trucks, and then go and do that back and forth. And so they didn't have a good process, they weren't really experienced in it, and they didn't quite understand the limitations of their equipment. And so that was causing a whole bunch of angst, and that could go into what I call the dumb tax. The dumb tax, we don't know what we don't know. It's often, I get calls every day from people that don't know things that they want to know. And once they know that, then they can make better decisions. Well, if you don't know what you don't know, and you don't realize that these earth movers are spinning their wheels and you're paying them by the hour, I call that the dumb tax, just because you don't know. So I took Mike Otto down there at the request of the landowner, and Mike said, here's the problem. He said, they're not building themselves an escape path. They're digging a hole way too deep. They're getting down into the water table, where what they need to be doing is taking that dirt off the bottom of that lake a foot or two at a time and going laterally across the lake. And as they're going, they need to build a road so that the dump trucks can stay on the road if they do get down in the bottom of the lake. And so it was a matter of they didn't know what they were doing because they'd never, and great guys, they just haven't ever done that before. So let's see here. I want to see here. Go back up here. David, do pea gravel spawning beds need geotechnical fabric base, or can the pea gravel just lay on the lake bed? Anything on top of the fabric before placing the pea gravel? I'm a big fan of good geotech fabric, porous, laying on the bottom that you put the pea gravel on. Because Here's what happens. When you put 4 or 5 inches of pea gravel on top of a clay shelf, under 2 feet of water or whatever you got, 3 feet of water in a pond, over time that pea gravel will tend to migrate down in the mud, and a lot of it goes away. It just sinks down in the mud. But if you put some, landscape fabric, geotech fabric that doesn't float, you don't want to use plastic. You want to make sure it lays down flat and it can breathe. And then put the gravel on top of that, then that extends the life of that spawning bed for a long, long time because the gravel won't migrate down into the bottom. Let's see here. Dustin says, LOL, she will be okay. Hoping to start construction on my lake this summer. Looking forward to it. I'm an excavating contractor and finally getting to build one for myself. She better read it to me. Put your earbuds in and read it. Get her read it to you. There you go. Latham bought a knockoff. Wish I'd have bought a Texas Hunter. I hear that from time to time. Jeff Wallen, I was told look at your pond as an ecosystem. Well, actually, your pond is an ecosystem. Because if you look at it, there are so many things all come together. You got to have happy water. Now, you guys that watch this show regularly know that's something I say all the time. You got to have happy water. Then you got to have the right habitat for the different sizes of the different species of fish that you want to thrive. If you want to grow a great big bluegill, but you don't leave enough cover for baby bluegill to hide in until they can grow to be 2 or 3 inches long, you're not going to have great big bluegills. So you got to have the right kind of habitat. The third thing is the food chain. If you don't have enough food, it takes 10 pounds at each trophic level. It takes 10 pounds of food for the next level to gain a pound. So it takes 10 pounds of plankton for insects to gain a pound. It takes 10 pounds of insects for little bitty fish to gain a pound. It takes 10 pounds of little bitty fish for bigger fish to gain a pound. It takes 10 pounds of those for big bass to gain. So you truly do have an ecosystem. You got insects, you got microbes, you got aquatic plants, you've got water chemistry that affects the biology. And oh, by the way, the biology affects the water chemistry. So you have all these things that are coming together with sunlight. The days are starting to get longer again. It won't be long until the temperatures start to grow up and you'll start to see things become alive. So your pond is an ecosystem. It's a living, breathing entity that changes every day. It changes every day. When you get energy from the sun, fish are eating fish, insects are growing and hatching and flying away, and birds eat them, bats eat them, whatever you do. Your pond is an ecosystem, and not only is it an ecosystem, it contributes to the surrounding ecosystems. You see birds coming. You see wildlife coming. You get birds nesting closer. You get kingfishers. You get egrets. You get great blue herons. You get otters. And so there you go. Chris Chavetta. Texas Hunter feeders are amazing. We have 18 of them around Innsbruck. Amazing growth rate due to regular feeding. And you know what? That's a big, important thing. What Chris just said is probably the most significant point about feeding fish, and that's consistency. You got to feed the right kind of feed, and you have choices there. Now, the right kind of feed may be, something to supplement, but if you want to grow big fish, then you better have a higher protein feed. And if your feeder is clogged up and doesn't feed for 6 days before you figure it out, that's 6 days you're not going to make up. So having a good feeder, feeding a good quality food consistently, that's the key to a good feeding program. And a good feeding program is gonna enhance that fishery quite a bit. Latham on my pipe that is 45 in the pond has no kind of cage over the opening. Is that an issue? The issue that would be, Latham, is if it doesn't now. When you say 45, I'm presuming you mean at a 45-degree angle going through the dam. If the top of the pipe is sticking at the water level, the problem with not having a cage on it is that it can clog up. And I have seen, matter of fact, I read a story last year. I've mentioned this on this show. There was a fellow up in Oklahoma whose pipe got clogged with debris, and the lake rose 5 feet, and it was really rolling over the emergency spillway. So he decided he'd go dive down and pull the debris off of that overflow pipe so the water level could get back down. He got sucked into that pipe and he drowned. So there can be safety issues with it, but the main thing of not having a cage over a pipe is that it can clog up. And I'll tell you a story here. When I first moved to Whitesboro back in 1984, I had about a 4-acre hatchery pond not far from where I am now that had a bunch of bluegills in it. And I had a guy call me and wanted to buy some bluegills in January. So I needed the money, and I was comfortable stocking the bluegills in his lake. So I thought, the best way to get these, the pond was 12 feet deep, which was the biggest pond on the whole hatchery, the deepest pond. It was actually a reservoir. So I thought, I bet you I can drain that down about 5 feet, shrink the size down to about half. Then I could get those fish out, take the fish that I needed to sell, then separate and sort through the rest of the fish. So I could put some brood fish in this pond over here and some more brood fish over here and some of the little fish to grow out over here in one of these grow out ponds. So opened the valve, went home, went to bed, came back the next morning, and that pond hadn't dropped 6 inches. There was no water, a little bit of water trickling out of the dadgum valve. And that pipe was 8 feet under the surface. And I thought, crap. So I turned the valve off, let the water pressure build back up, and then opened it real fast. And water just flushed out, but nothing else. Then it just went back to a trickle. So I went home, got a couple towels, went out there in the afternoon, stripped down to my skivvies, and jumped in that dadgum pond and went down into the bottom of it. It took me about 3 tries in 48-degree water, and I found the pipe, and there was a big red ear slider stuck to that pipe. And it was stuck just right where it was wedged in there enough that it disrupted the flow, and it was wedged. And I reached down there. I had the valve off, which I knew enough to do that. So when I turned the valve off, I couldn't get my foot sucked into that 8-inch pipe. Well, I went and pulled that 12-inch turtle out of that pipe, went and opened the valve, and several days later, I was getting my bluegill out. So there's your story for the day. So let's see. Shane McIntyre, let's see here. Hey, I got a question. I'm not sure if somebody's already asked this, but can you explain what happens to a pond's ecosystem when winter starts to take a hold of it, especially when you're looking at significant ice, 10 inches and more? How does that affect the fish in general and the ecosystem of the pond? Here's what happens. Pretty much everything goes dormant. The plants go dormant, although they are respiring. And under the ice, there's not very many situations where the ice is clear. So the sunlight stopped from going down, penetrating into the water column. So what happens is those plants continue to respire. The fish are breathing, so oxygen levels start to go down. Now the good news is colder water has a higher affinity for oxygen. So colder water can be 95 to 100% saturated going into when ice forms. So you go in with a lot of oxygen. So depending on the amount of plant mass that you've got that's either decomposing or respiring, it's going to consume some oxygen. So deeper water is better than shallower water in the winter. But what happens with the fish is they tend to congregate in the deeper part. Because what happens, remember, you guys know that water is its densest at 40 degrees or 39 degrees. So the water at the bottom of the pond is the warmest and the densest. The fish have a tendency to go orient to some kind of structure in the deeper water. Since they're cold-blooded, their metabolism rate slows way, way, way down. And I don't know why somebody's calling this time of day. Why am I even looking? I'm not going to answer it. Leave a message. So what happens is the fish's metabolism rate slows down, so they don't eat as much, they don't move around as much. So they get lethargic. Now, that doesn't mean they won't eat. I mean, you see pictures on Facebook all the time of people catching fish through the ice. So they'll still feed. They still feed much. So what happens is everything kind of gets put on hold. And then when ice comes off, temperatures start to go up, the whole ecosystem revives and gets vibrant again. It's kind of the same thing like what you see in the forest. Deciduous trees lose their leaves. They go dormant. So let's see here. Danny Mac, thank you for the geotextile fabric bit. Getting tired of dumping fresh gravel annually. There you go. Easier on your back, Danny. Danny Mac. Jeff Thompson, how do you judge your gizzard shad population without doing an electrofishing survey? And if you wanted to add additional forage gizzards in a trophy bass spawn, what size would you recommend? And would you try to time that with the gizzard spawn? So I'm going to say, yeah, time it with the gizzard shad spawn. You really, I'll tell you this. What's the best way to explain this? How do you judge your gizzard shad population? You could judge them to some extent with a cast net. Now keep in mind, gizzard shad, once they're 9 or 10 inches long, they're making their living in the mud. Because you know why they call them a gizzard shad, right? They have a gizzard. So they're feeding, and they have a mouth under their face, so they're bottom feeders. You know, so if the pond has a tendency to be muddy, if there's a lot of shallow water, you can sure use a cast net to start judging your gizzard shad population. You can also judge the body condition of your bass and see if they're getting enough feed, enough food. But the best way to do it is with an electrofishing survey into the spring. What size would you recommend if you're going to stock them? Now, I'm going to tell you that here's the caveat, and I don't want anybody taking this out of context. I'm going to say it this way. Every trophy bass lake that I manage intensely has gizzard shad. I don't stock those gizzard shad until at least 25% of the biomass of bass, in other words, like pounds per acre, exceeds 25 pounds. So what that basically means is I want at least 8 to 10 3-pound bass or bigger before I stock gizzard shad. So I want at least 25 pounds of bass per acre that are 3 pounds and up before I'll stock gizzard shad, simply because they grow so big so fast. And the downside to gizzard shad is once they reach a certain density, they tend to give off a pheromone that inhibits reproduction, not only of them, but my opinion that I've seen in lakes is they'll inhibit reproduction of other fish as well with that pheromone given off in the water. Trey Carpenter, otters are awesome. Yeah, they are. You know what? I got a couple of guys on here that would like to send some to you so you can watch them play and swim on their backs and climb up on the dock. And so otters they're totally awesome in the wild. But you know what? Listen, you guys can click on Trey's link here. He'll help you rehome some otters. And you know what? If you could catch them live, I'd be all for rehoming them. The problem is when you catch one otter, you're taking it out of its family unit. If you shoot one otter, you're taking it out of its family unit. All right, so Latham says it's 5 feet above the bottom. So 5 feet above the bottom. You know what? That doesn't give me a whole lot of heartburn. I don't think that you're going to have to worry about a cage 5 feet from the bottom. The only thing that you'd have there is if it could fill up with any kind of debris. But if it's big enough, most of the debris that's 5 feet down is small enough that it can be sucked out of the pipe during high flow rates. Chad Bowman, we had our first kingfisher this year. Cool bird, Eastland, Texas. Didn't see the spoonbills. Some cormorants and geese. You know, that's really Eastland is really pretty much west of the natural flyway for cormorants. So it's interesting. Now, cormorants eat a lot of fish. Geese, they don't, but, you know, they poop about every 30 seconds. So Dan Reasoner, hello, Bob. Great show, educational like always. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. You're certainly welcome. Let's see, Jim, half acre old pond. I just bought pond, tons of green sunfish and channel cat. Depends on what your goals are. It's 7:30, so I'm going to wrap up, guys. The green sunfish will feed bass. So if a half acre pond is a little bit small for bass, but it is just the right size for channel cat will eat green sunfish. The problem with having green sunfish in a channel catfish pond is they'll wart you to death when you're fishing for channel cat. You know, about the best way to catch a channel cat in a pond full of green sunfish is catch some green sunfish, hook them in the back, use them for bait. If the channel cat will eat them. Vito, where can you find a pond with no water? On a map. Oh, a dad joke. I love it. You're welcome. See, right on about impact of the ecosystems over 3 years. The difference is noticeable in many ways. The funniest is young hawks figuring they can catch fish. They could, but they pull up before they get to. I bet that is fun to watch. Shane, thanks for that. I appreciate you. You bet. A little bit on the same topic. Is it true that when the plants die, they give off toxic gases to force them out of the shallows in the winter? It depends on the volume of plants. And the toxic gases are more in the form of overusing oxygen, giving off carbon dioxide. Now, when plants break down, they do give off hydrogen sulfide. Like when you step in the black gooey muck and you can smell sulfur, that's the gas being released from the water. So it can, but it depends on the rate of the digestion and the rate of the decomposition. So I can see how fish can be run out of the shallows in cold water. Let's see, Anthony, if you don't have enough predators, keep the shad in check. They will suffer from mass stops. Now, that's once their density gets high. You know, which that's absolutely right, Anthony. You're right on. Right there. You dealt with it a few times on a 40-acre park district. Yeah, exactly. Because what will happen is once those shad reach a certain density and they get a few years on them and they're not reproducing, you get a couple of hard, rapid cold snaps. You'll get a percentage of them. That's nature's way of killing them to where they can come back and start to reproduce again. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Friday night date, Wyatt, attaboy. Watch it later. Okay, holy cow, we still got a lot of questions. I'm gonna do this real quick. Billy Bates, Bob, we had a big flood in early August here in Maryland. My pond was raised and flooded for 24 hours. How did that affect my fish? It probably didn't. It probably didn't. Now, if you had a good connection going into the Patuxent River, then you could get migration of snakeheads coming in from there. But odds are that if you lost any fish, it's going to be tiny fish that migrated out with the water flow. If you've got great habitat, happy water, good food chain, your game fish, they don't have a reason to move. They want to stay there. If they've got a home where they can orient, be safe, away from where the water's flowing heavily, they're not going to go anywhere. All right, guys. Hey, listen, remember, $35, cheaper than a Friday night date, lasts a year. Thanks for watching this show. I will catch up with you guys again next Wednesday. I'm not sure where I'll be next Wednesday, but I'm pretty sure I'll be traveling. However, I'll work it out to where I can do the show either from my pickup or a restaurant or something. I don't know. I'll figure it out. So, until then,